Hi everybody, welcome back to the Comstock channel. I'm Marlin Bohling with you, and we sure do appreciate you joining us. And if you would, be sure to like this video, subscribe to this video. Just click on that little bell icon down below and we'll let you know every time we post a new podcast. And be sure and share this video with others as well as we continue to grow our audience and spread the message. All right, I want to welcome aboard from Kansas Wheat. We have Justin Gilpin with us, the CEO of the Kansas Wheat Commission. I guess you call it Kansas Wheat now, right?
Right. I serve as the CEO for the Kansas Wheat Commission and Kansas Association of Wheat Growers.
All right. So, kind of a critical time here this past week. We have had numerous reports coming out of Kansas. Of course, it depends on where you are, I guess, in the state. I used to farm in Republic County, Kansas, in the northern part, and I know what it's like. You can have scattered rain, you can have scattered frost, you have scattered drought in some areas. What is the deal? I heard all kinds of stories over the past week that some Kansas wheat was doing great. Some Kansas wheat they're going to have to write off. And the national media seems to have a hard time grappling with this. Now, I know that there have been some moisture systems moving through, but is it going to be too little too late, or can the wheat come through okay?
Well, it's been a really interesting year, Marlin. I think it's hard for everybody to grapple exactly what the crop conditions are, but the fact that they are deteriorating is real. And probably what's most disheartening about the Kansas wheat crop conditions right now is just the promise that this crop had coming out of winter. We've had back-to-back very challenging years due to the drought, and the crop conditions coming out of winter actually look as good as we've had in the last 10 years. But the fact that we just missed out on rains, we had such a warm February, the crop broke dormancy early. So we had high temperatures with a lot of wind that really dried things out really fast, and that got the crop really growing. And it was a critical time when that crop was needing moisture that it instead of moisture, it got high temperatures and wind. And I think that's what really happened to those crop conditions where they started to deteriorate, and they really, in a dramatic fashion, went backwards really fast. We had 53% good to excellent ratings kind of ending March. And as we end April, we're now around 36% good to excellent, which will probably drop again on Monday because we've missed out on some rains in a big portion this week. But I think that's probably one of the reasons, Marlin. But also, you see a lot of variation on some of the wheat that's in no-till and that's been in good no-till practices. You see that wheat that's hanging on a little bit better, that's waiting on that rain. And then some of the wheat that's been double cropped out in corn stalks behind corn, that wheat really looks challenged just because it got up in the fall and out of dormancy and tillard, but it was needing that shot of moisture this spring to really get it carrying through. And that's the wheat that really is going backwards pretty fast. Now, we're not going to have the high abandonment that we saw with last year's disaster with the drought conditions. Hopefully, the next 30 days are going to be really critical for this crop. But that's one of the reasons why you're seeing, the people scratching their heads about the crop conditions, where the eastern part of the state, which has gotten the rain, that crop looks pretty good. But where we've got a big area in that west central southwest part of the state, kind of from Wichita west, Hutchinson west, those are the areas that have really missed out on the rain the last 60 days. That crop is needing the rain. It was needing the rain yesterday. So that's what's been unfortunate, Marlin.
And just for the benefit of our audience, we are recording this over the weekend. The crop progress numbers or condition numbers will come out on Monday afternoon, about the same time that this comes out. Just wanted to explain that for a second. The weather out there in Kansas, it's so unfortunate because you've been in a drought for what, 4 years now straight?
Right.
And this is like the second time we've had a head fake where you get really hefty rains for a short period and then it just shuts off again for like another year. And it seems like we may be doing this for the second time now. I mean, how long has it been in the Western Plains since you've had a good drink of water out there for that wheat crop.
Well, we did have decent moisture in the fall, which really helped the crop get established. But we have areas in the western part of the state that have gone 250 days without a 1 inch rain right now. That's what's when you have these rainfall areas. If you think the state of Kansas, you have areas in the western part of the state on the Colorado border that may receive 15 to 18 inches of rain annually, and the eastern part of the state where on Kansas City side of the state of Kansas, where they may receive somewhere between 45 inches of rain annually. So there's a big difference in the climate across the state of Kansas. But what's been unfortunate probably about those low rainfall areas, when you look at just averages and annual averages, is you're exactly right. When they get some of those bigger rains that came last May and through some big rains in the summer, when you only get 15 inches of rain a year, you'd like to not get half of that in a one day with a thunderstorm. And you remember those thunderstorms in Kansas, Marlin. I know you do.
Yeah, all too well. Well, all right. So let's talk about this. A couple of weeks ago, I think it was a couple of weeks ago, Justin. You don't hear much about it now, but Kansas temperatures went down in the low 20s, didn't they? Over much of the crop, and at the time, I mean, it was way past the joint stage already.
Right. So that was the other thing about this crop, Marlin, is with that warm February that we had, the crop was, anywhere from, 10 to 14 days ahead of schedule. So we were way ahead of average. But on April 21st was that day that we got really cold. And, just within the last few days, maybe because of the drought conditions and the crop conditions deteriorating a little bit, we are hearing a lot more reports of that freeze damage starting to show up. Because freeze damage is always so hard to quantify right when it happens. And a lot of times when we've had freeze damages, the reason why you say wheat has 9 lives, right, is when you do have a freeze damage, a late freeze, and if you can get cool, wet weather to follow that over the course of the next month after a freeze event, you may have secondary tillers that can come on and maybe make up for some of the damage from the freeze that might have occurred. But what's happening with that April 21st freeze event, Marlin, is it's really starting to become apparent. We haven't had the cool, wet weather to maybe bring on those secondary tillers. We've actually had the opposite happen, where with the high temperatures and lack of rainfall, the secondary tillers are kind of dropping off, and that freeze damage that happened is starting to become more apparent. That's all the way from Hutchinson all the way up to Belleville, that we're kind of hearing reports of that of freeze damage. And I think when the wheat tour happens, that's probably one of the things that's not being talked about that much. That if I had to guess, that might be something that comes out of that first day of the wheat tour, is a few more people starting to bring attention to that late freeze event that did happen, Marlon.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that because I really think it's been getting lost in the shuffle here in the last few days in the media. I haven't heard anybody really talking about it much, and that could be a sleeper. I mean, I know from firsthand experience, you don't know how much damage was done with that frost or freeze until those heads pop out, and then all of a sudden, hey, those heads are white. What's with that? It looks like head scab or something like that. And by then, I mean, like you say, it's too late to do anything.
Yeah, just it basically kills that head when it's in that growing point of the boot, and once it starts the joint, and then that head goes ahead and emerges, and like you said, you see a white head out there that just doesn't have kernels, and that's really it's very discouraging when you don't know for sure until you run the combine through it.
Yeah, you talk about a disheartening feeling when you go out there in the morning and see the first heads pop out and they look like that. You're in for some trouble if that's the case. Now, you mentioned the wheat tour. That's coming up here in what, a couple of weeks right now?
Correct. It's on May 13th. May 13th through the 18th is 16th is the wheat tour this year. Now that they used to do the wheat tour the first week of May. So back when they used to do it the week before USDA would come out with their monthly crop report. that the May USDA report is the first estimate of the winter wheat production for the United States. And so they used to always do that wheat tour the week before. So the wheat tour would kind of have a number that the industry would estimate prior to the USDA number, but now they do it a little bit later. So the USDA number will come out, I believe, on May 8th, the week before the wheat tour. The wheat tour is put on by the Wheat Quality Council. The Wheat Quality Council is made up of milling, baking companies, grain companies, farmer and wheat breeding companies are all participants in the Wheat Quality Tour. So it's a really unique event because you have all of industry that comes together to do that wheat tour, and it becomes a real networking opportunity. And I'm glad they do it after the USDA number now because in my mind, it's not like the Pro Farmer Corn Tour where they have a bunch of agronomist experts that are going out making a yield comparison, trying to get a number that's better than USDA. To me, the Wheat Quality Council Tour is more about the wheat industry actually coming together, bringing attention to the wheat industry, getting out and learning more about the Kansas wheat crop, about what goes into wheat production, identifying challenges that might be out there firsthand, like the freeze damage that you're mentioning, seeing firsthand what type of impact this drought conditions are having on the crop, but then also being able to have farmers, grain handlers, flour millers, and bakers kind of all together traveling the state of Kansas over a course of 1 week makes that for a pretty unique industry experience that usually turns out to be a pretty good networking opportunity that people get to have contacts throughout their career.
Well, and the millers will get a first look at what the quality will be like for the year.
Well, and that's one of the things. Last year we had the severe drought, so Kansas had the lowest wheat production since 1966 with 201 million bushel production last year because of the drought and the high abandonment that we had last year. And when we have very stressed crop with low production like that, we had a very high protein crop where the state of Kansas actually averaged 13% protein for the state. So from a quality standpoint, we had good functionality, but just didn't have the bushels. And so this year, you mentioned how there's the eastern part of the state and some northern part of the state that got pretty heavy rains over the course of the previous week. We may have some higher yielding, lower protein areas and maybe some higher protein, lower yielding areas in the southwest part of the state. So there's going to be a lot of variation and uncertainty with this crop. And so being able to get out there and hear what those millers are thinking, the grain buyers are thinking, and being able to discuss this with our direct customers of Kansas wheat farmers will be a really good experience. And hopefully we have catch a rain between now and then, so we have something a little bit better to talk about than what we're talking about right now, Marlin.
Well, from what I can gather, it sounds like the problems extend well up into Nebraska, right?
Well, they do, but the Nebraska crop, where we're talking about the Kansas crop being a little bit ahead of schedule, so our window of time in the Kansas crop is a little bit more narrow between now and harvest, where that Nebraska crop had been kind of going backwards a little bit, but they were able to get a little bit more widespread heavy rains here the past couple days, which I think should benefit that crop, and they do have a little bit more time. So, but that north, I do think that that crop probably is going to benefit a little bit more from the rains that unfortunately a big portion of Kansas missed with this event that everybody had their fingers crossed that we were hoping we would get.
I guess I did hear from some folks in Nebraska that they were very concerned about that freeze event too, though, where the wheat, it was past the joint stage. And anytime you get it down in the lower 20s, and I'm sure they were there too, that's got to be a concern, I would think.
Yes. Yep. And just like what you're mentioning with Nebraska, I know there's some concerns with how far, because those cold temperatures really dipped. They dipped all the way down into parts of Oklahoma also. So it wasn't just an isolated event in a certain area or on the border of Kansas and Nebraska. It's potentially a farther reaching impact that I think a lot of crop scouts and farmers are going to be trying to figure out exactly what extent that freeze damage might have had.
Let me put my marketing hat on here for a second. This presents an interesting situation because by and large, over the years, Kansas wheat, or I should say hard red winter wheat, generally has a fairly stout premium over Chicago wheat, the hard red, or excuse me, the soft red wheat. That actually reversed here in the last few months. Chicago took a premium position there for a little while. That was kind of rare. But now, from what I can understand, the soft red wheat looks like it's in tremendous shape this year, while the hard red wheat seems to really be struggling again with more drought conditions and that sort of thing and that freeze event. I wonder if that's just going to jumble things up now on the exchange interactions, the intra-exchange spreads, if you will, between Chicago and Kansas City, and now the Minneapolis wheat too, because spring wheat's not out of the woods either yet.
Well, I think, yeah, you definitely have the marketing hat on, so I'll let you make your bets on that, Marlon. But it's this wheat market is hard enough to figure out what direction and why we move to such extremes sometimes. But I do think that spread between Kansas City and Chicago, one of the reasons it did move is the concerns about the Kansas hard red winter wheat conditions, and the fact that soft red winter wheat looked had been benefiting from some of the rains that have been, maybe we've missed out in the high plains. There's probably also some one of the reasons that's maybe given some strength to Kansas City also outside of the conditions with Kansas is there are some concerns with some dryness in Russia and the Black Sea region that might have some implications on bread quality wheats like hard red winter wheat. And that, along with some other things that might be happening with some of the EU crop, might have had some freeze damage, and their crop conditions have been deteriorating a little bit. There were some headlines this week about India's crop not being quite as good, that they may be a wheat importer this year. And so all of those things, I think, kind of along with the concerns about the conditions of the U.S. hard red winter wheat crop in Kansas, I think kind of compounded why we saw the strength in the Kansas City market, and why we're kind of seeing that trend move that way, where there might have been because of the last couple of months where you mentioned Kansas City was at went to a discount to Chicago. One of the reasons why there might have been a lot of heavy shorts in the Kansas City market now that they've trying to, because of the uncertainties around some of the global events, along with the hard red winter wheat conditions, that seeing them try to lift some of those shorts, that's brought in that strength to the Kansas City market. But if you have a good idea about where that's going to go, I'd always take some advice, I guess. But it's hard to outguess what these markets are going to do. But I do think there's multiple factors at play that are kind of impacting that Kansas City-Chicago relationship, and also the strength that we're seeing in Kansas City beyond just the conditions we're seeing in Kansas right now.
Well, before I let you go, can you give me an idea what the range is right now on the growth of the wheat? What stage of growth are we in from south to north?
Well, we've got wheat headed out in south central Kansas right now. We've got wheat headed out all the way up into, there's some wheat depending on planting date that's starting to head out around Salina. And so, when I think back about the Kansas wheat crops, one of them in my career, the 2012 harvest was probably the most advanced crop that I can remember. We had combining in Hays, Kansas on May 20th, I think and I think that's the earliest I could ever remember that happening. When I saw how advanced this crop was getting and moving along, and I didn't think we were going to quite rival that year in maturity and that quick of a harvest. But typically we'd like to see harvest starting kind of south central Kansas at June 11th, June 12th. That's kind of a day that seems to have some combines doing some cutting in the southern counties of Kansas. I wouldn't be surprised if we're maybe a week ahead of time this year, Marlin. And if we stay, the next 30 days are going to really dictate a lot about um, temperature that we get, whether the crop progresses fast, or if we could get some cooler temperatures and some wet weather, that would probably tamper down some growth and help this crop out. But and maybe string out that harvest starting a little bit longer. But those are the things that we'll be watching over the next 30 days to see how this crop progresses, and see when the combines get rolling and we find out what's really going to be out there.
When we get close to harvest season, are we going to be able to go to your website to find updates?
Absolutely. Yeah, one of the things that the Kansas Wheat Communications Group does is works with our local grain elevators and farmers, and puts out harvest reports. So the Kansas Daily Harvest Report. I hope that you and your subscribers can check out and get an update on how the early harvest, and we'll follow harvest all the way from Kiowa Co-op, which usually down around Anthony, which usually is one of the first ones to take in a load of wheat down there in early June, to all the way up to some of the last combines rolling in Goodland, Kansas, the second or third week in July. So,
well, we look forward to it. Hopefully, fingers crossed, the wheat will come through it like a lot of times it can. Like you say, it does have 9 lives. Hopefully, it's not real dire this year, and we can get things to improve before harvest time. Justin, thanks for the update. I appreciate that, and best of luck if I don't talk to you before the wheat tour. Hope it goes well for you guys, and we look forward to more updates as we get into the harvest. Justin Gilpin with us. He is the CEO of Kansas Wheat. And that'll do it for this episode. Appreciate you joining us. For our producer, Brian Hendrickson, I'm Marlin Bohling. We'll catch you next time on the Comstock channel.
Thanks for joining us on our Comstock YouTube channel. Don't forget, you can also find us on Facebook and TikTok as well. Futures trading involves risk. The risk of loss in trading futures and or options is substantial, and each investor and or trader must consider whether this is a suitable investment. Past performance is not indicative of future results.